She tightened the strap of her tote as if anchoring herself to a new life. Then she saw him. Alexander was at the head of the orientation table, sleeves rolled to the forearms of a suit that fit like it knew its place. The windows behind him made a clean mirror of the city. He looked like a photograph cut out of one of those business magazines Emma had avoided. For a moment, everything else, the lemon-clean smell of the lobby, the low hum of the building's HVAC, the polite rustle of newcomer name tags, compressed into the single, private recognition that had no business resurfacing on her first day. She had not expected the past to ride the elevator with her. She had not expected it to sit in the corner of her new life and smile as if it belonged. Emma had come to the tower on purpose. The job at Lydon Vale, a name designed to sound both traditional and global without anchoring it to any particular person, was the edge she had worked toward since college. Months of late-night freelance projects, weekend shifts at a bakery that taught her how to keep dough pliable and hopes practical, the scholarship that had gotten her through grad school. The last few years had been an exercise in small recoveries, paying off debts, learning how to write proposals that clicked with clients, teaching herself to say no to offers that sounded shiny but meant little. She told herself all morning that her past belonged in a different zip code. The night with Alexander had been a night, nothing more, mutual, messy, and the kind of thing you file under learned lessons and lock away. It had been years. That was the ledger she kept counting by. Today, that ledger looked thinner when his eyes lifted, and for a slant of a second held hers. The orientation room smelled faintly of new ink and coffee gone stale. Introductions went on with efficient reverence. HR slides scrolled through mission statements and compliance checklists. Around Emma, her new colleagues moved with the easy choreography of people who had already learned the arc of the building. The cafeteria on 9, the gym at 16, the best coffee vendor on the corner that delivered by 11. Mia, a marketing associate with quick hands and a quicker laugh, leaned in to whisper, "You okay?" Emma nodded. Claire from legal offered a polite, watchful smile. Marcus from HR tracked the room with a calm that suggested he had seen too many first-day nerves to be surprised. Alexander introduced himself as part of the executive leadership team. His voice was steady, a practiced clarity. He spoke in the same clipped cadence that filled conference rooms and television panels. He outlined the company's priorities with gestures that made metrics look like natural law. When he reached the part of the presentation about cross-functional innovation, Emma felt both the heat of professional interest and the cold subtext of remembrance.
He presented the world they would build, an efficient machine of products, clients, ethics, and in that world she had been an accidental, unfiled margin note. They met in the hall after the session. He offered the kind of small social grace executives offer to new hires, a handshake, a point about resources, a mention of her team lead. "Welcome to Lydon Vale," he said. His voice had no ownership of the past. Her heart, foolishly, registered the absence as sharp as any presence. She was competent, and she knew it. Within her first week, she volunteered to lead a small pilot, a digital campaign pitched toward a demographic the company had been missing. The pitch was tight because she had learned to be spare. The slide deck leaned on numbers and a single persuasive case study. At the meeting, Alexander listened. He raised a question about scalability that showed he had read the deck closely and not just skimmed the headlines. Later, he greenlighted the resources Emma asked for, enough to get the pilot out the door, which meant someone powerful had seen something in her that they were willing to risk against a budget. That nod was a lift and a tether all at once. It meant opportunity. It also meant a gaze that sometimes checked in with her across the table, as if measuring whether she was still the same person who'd spent one night with him years ago. Office life settled into an easy rhythm that had its own textures, the scrape of chairs under laminate, the hiss of the espresso machine in the break room, the muffled laughter by the window that smelled faintly of rain on clean concrete. Gossip arrived in the same stealthy ways, a raised eyebrow over a Slack thread, a joke cut off by a sudden professionaling of tone. Rumor never announced itself as rumor. It arrived as an atmosphere. Somebody in investor relations, Robert, who liked to appear casual while placing a quiet anchor, allowed a speculative aside in the kitchen line that could have been curiosity and was likely intended to be curiosity made practical. Emma learned to answer to the work she had been hired for. She negotiated timelines, shepherded design teams, and stayed late to rewrite headlines with Claire's input. Daniel, a thoughtful account manager from the regional team, often lingered to offer a hand when tech hiccups sabotaged a deadline. He smelled of citrus and contained humor. He listened in a way that made conversation feel less like a ledger and more like a genuine exchange. Daniel became a small island of steadiness. Through him, Emma found an ally who saw her craft and respected her boundaries. Alexander's presence continued to be a hum beneath the office day's heat. Sometimes he would drop into a meeting and tighten the air as conversation sharpened. Other times he would be in the wings, offering a professional compliment that was efficient and oddly protective. The subtext accrued like water on a window pane. It made some things blurry and others unexpectedly clear.
He could, on a whim, amplify Emma's voice in a budget meeting. He could also, with a glance, remind her of the unrecorded ledger that had once bound them in a single sensorial night. One evening, a late email summoned Emma to an after-hours meeting. The message was spare, a departmental follow-up, a need to clarify roles. She thought it practical. When she pushed through the glass door and into the quiet of a half-lit conference suite, the city night's lights skittered against the glass. Alexander was there, the blonde light haloing his profile. The room smelled like polished wood and the faint ghost of lemon cleaner from daytime. For a few minutes they spoke as colleagues do, matrices and deliverables flattening conversation into work. Then the calendar pinged away, and the remaining professional niceties surrendered to the closeness of the night. Alexander's voice altered. It lost some of the executive's carefully calibrated distance and acquired the lower, more vulnerable tone of someone leaning in to say something dangerous. "You should know," he said, "that honesty can cost you in places like this." He did not elaborate. His hands rested on the table in a way that made the room small. Emma felt the sentence like a hand on her shoulder and a warning at once. He wasn't threatening in the cartoonish sense. He was laying out a ledger. The intersection of personal history and corporate calculation could hurt. "Cost me what?" she asked. "Your role," he said. "Your reputation. Sometimes both. Boards, investors, they don't like ambiguity. They don't like distractions. If people think someone in the pipeline isn't wholly committed, they react." It read like counsel and like confession. He told her that he could help. He said he could protect her. In the kindest voice he had used in months, he offered to put in a word, to shield the pilot, to be an internal advocate. "I can smooth things," he said, "but you need to be careful. The truth is sharp." She listened. The subtext of their conversation lodged between the fluorescent lights and the sound of a nearby elevator. He presented a trade, his protection for her discretion. The implication was that silence would buy safety. It was a choice framed as benevolence. Emma said nothing for a long beat. Saying yes would be quick and convenient. Saying no would insist on a thornier path. She had worked too hard to let silence be the currency that bought her career. "I don't need to be carded by you," she said finally, a measured line. It wasn't defiance so much as a boundary. "I can do my job without personal favors." Alexander's face, used to the slow rhythms of negotiation, flickered. He respected the line, and then with an outwardly neutral tilt of his head, he conceded. "Understood. I will not use this as leverage, but understand the environment you're stepping into." They walked out of the room together into the echo of the night. The elevator dinged. The lobby light wavered.
There was a civility now wrapped in a quiet acknowledgement that the past existed and could be weaponized. She returned to her desk after that night, more aware of the climate around her. There was only so much anyone could control. The rest had to be navigated. Rumors took their time, but they always arrive. At first, there were whispers, a conversation overheard in the cafe, a speculative tweet from an anonymous account that implied favoritism, a poorly timed picture of Alexander offering a private congratulations to her on a small win that someone had interpreted into a narrative. The office buzzed in tiny increments. Colleagues who used to say good morning with routine turned inward in a way that felt like weighing. People who had been casual smiled less. People who had been quiet made idle assumptions. Sophia, Alexander's executive assistant, held an efficiency that often doubled as damage control. She moved like a person who had learned the ecosystem of executive errors, and when gossip arrived, she quarantined it with strategic calm. But all the efficiency in the building could not contain the outside world. An evening charity gala, intended as celebration, turned into the staging ground for the crisis. The gala had been organized months before, a black tie event with a ribbon cutting for the company's latest partnership, donors and glittering rows, cameras focused on the board as if it were plate glass polished for a window to the city's elite. Emma had attended in her supportive capacity. She was there to celebrate the department's achievements, to watch the campaign she had launched in months arc into a live audience. She wore a simple dress that hugged around the shoulders and allowed her to feel more human in a room designed to absorb personality. Halfway through the evening, when toasts had smoothed into applause and conversation felt practiced lightness, a murmur passed through the room. The projection screen went dark, then filled with a clip. The clip itself was short.
It had the disorienting quality of something filmed quickly. The camera angle was off, the light was poor, and voices overlapped. On screen, there was Alexander at a private dinner months earlier, talking in low tones with a small group. Emma recognized the setting in flickers, the leather chair she had once sat in, the angle of a lamp. The clip cut to a moment of nearer intimacy, not explicit but private. Hand proximity, a voice saying a name, the implication of familiarity. The edit blurred context. In another frame, someone in the group, a voice that sounded like a board member, laughed in a way the room took for conspiratorial. The whole montage landed like evidence of entanglement, private relationships entangled with corporate conversation. It was enough. Phones lifted, camera flashes flowered. The room that had only been a celebration became a kind of tribunal. People who had clapped minutes before searched faces, whispered, exchanged notes.
The clip moved fast beyond the ballroom. Within minutes, it populated feeds, and reporters who had been on the edge of the event now had a salacious spark to chase. Investor relations scrambled to get on script. PR assembled, a practiced animal. Marketers dug for sound bites. Legal counsel scanned potential violations. The gala, so carefully curated, provided the first public airing. She felt it like a physical pressure. The lights seemed too bright, the space too small. Someone's hand grazed her arm with that shallow, automatic sympathy you extend when you don't know what else to do. Cameras angled as if they were asking her to explain herself. She felt suddenly that public and private had traded places without permission. Sophia converged immediately beside Alexander with the practiced grace of someone who could tidy a room with posture. Marcus from HR arrived with documents and confidentiality protocols, the language of paperwork offering structure in a way that made her jaw ache. Claire's expression disappeared into counsel. Behind them, Robert muttered to investor relations, "We need a statement, calm, immediate." Alexander's gaze skittered to her, then away. In that moment, she thought she saw the constraint he had spoken of, the board's pressure, investors' appetite for stability. He moved toward the podium with a hand on the mic like a man walking into a room where pieces of him were now being rearranged by other hands. On the stage, the company delivered the statement, an expression of concern, a commitment to an internal inquiry, language about privacy and company values. It was measured, legal, and inherently ambiguous. The audience heard the words and parsed them against breathless timelines. For Emma, the statement felt like both a shield and a sieve. It acknowledged the event, but filtered the specifics into corporate neutrality. That night, after the gala, the office became a site of tactical conversations. Olivia, the rookie PR hire who smelled of the nervous adrenaline of first crises, jotted down messages and timelines. James in investor relations paced like a man carrying fragile glass. Small, private exchanges grew louder as the clip stirred public imagination. There was an internal memo: no external comment, limit speaking engagements, preserve confidentiality. There were whispers of board conversations scheduled for the next day, of a compliance committee to examine potential conflicts of interest. As the days closed in, the spotlight sharpened. Callers left messages with quiet intensity. Reporters dug into LinkedIn, archived photographs and old social media that had been private in other years. The rumor engine found fuel. Someone in an online thread speculated about favoritism and campaign decisions. Someone else quoted a meeting minute that suggested a retread of approval processes.
Behind the scenes, the company enacted typical plots of fairness: a temporary firewall between relevant decision-makers and the contested campaign, an offer to set up an independent review, a pause on public-facing announcements related to the pilot. Alexander's demeanor shifted in a way that didn't betray guilt so much as logistical survival. He convened quieter sessions with board members. There were hostage-like pauses in conversation when he walked into rooms. The board's questions were administrative in tone, but personal in implication. Did any decision directly benefit Emma? Was there a pattern of preferential treatment? The legal team checked policies. Claire sat beside Emma and explained the possible routes: internal investigation, potential HR findings, the options the company might extend, public statements, confidentiality agreements, severance offers. Then a second velocity hit the story. An anonymous account published parts of a longer conversation, a version of a clip that suggested Alexander had discussed strategy with certain board figures in a manner that readers interpreted as collusion. The narrative mutated from private relationship to corporate compromise. Investors reacted with terse inquiries. Board members convened an emergency meeting. Emails multiplied like a storm. It was the kind of moment that pushed people into making practical, sometimes cruel choices. In quiet rooms, people with power assessed reputational risk in balance sheets and reputational burn rates. A quiet separation would be tidy, someone observed in a meeting Emma heard about through Claire. Buyouts limit exposure. An offer arrived at Emma's desk in the form of a neutral email from HR. The company would like to discuss an exit strategy to minimize disruption. Read, a buyout. Their language was careful as crossword clues. The subtext, accept the offer, sign a release, receive a sum that ensured silence and a swift, sanitized departure. She read it in the empty conference room, the light low and the city's outline outside like a promise and a question. The offer felt like a hand extended, but not for compassion. It was risk management. She thought about the nights she had labored to get promotions, the clients she had convinced, the nights at the bakery where she learned to be precise with ovens and with plans. She thought about the small wins that had gotten her here. Taking the buyout would close a chapter quickly, but it would also shape the narrative, that she had been a risk worth removing. When Claire laid out the options in legal terms, Emma recognized two divergent logics. One asked her to sell her story for stability. The other asked her to hold the work line and accept the mess. I won't be bought out to disappear, she told Claire. I won't sign my name to silence in exchange for a check. I won't let them own my exit. Claire's face softened into a professional empathy. It will be messy, she warned. It will be visible.
It may mean different teams look at you sideways. It may delay your pipeline. Then help me move, Emma said. If a move is safer and preserves my work, that's better than hiding. Marcus arranged a meeting where options were enumerated. After negotiation, a transfer was proposed, a lateral move to a regional office with autonomy over a portfolio and the ability to continue work without the daily proximity to the controversy. The title would be slightly different, the network would be recentered in another city, but the work, the things she cared about, would remain possible. It was a compromise that felt like a reclamation. She refused the buyout, accepted the transfer, and did it on her own terms. It was an act that watched courage in small increments, not a grand public challenge, but a practical choice to preserve agency and vocation. The company issued a statement about the transfer as a move to ensure continuity of services and to maintain team focus during an ongoing inquiry. The press read the transfer into a dozen narratives. Some praised her for not accepting a cash settlement, others suggested it was an exit dressed as continuity. The truth sat somewhere between the lines. Alexander's fate unfolded differently. The board, under pressure from investors and the public statement, recommended he step back from an executive role pending inquiry. It was a partial resignation, not an expulsion, but a removal of authority that made headlines and left tender flags in the company corridors. He released a statement that read like a practiced piece of paper: regret, commitment to transparency, cooperation with inquiry. Public conversations rippled, and those who had been close quietly rearranged themselves. The company announced a process to review conflicts of interest and adopt clearer disclosure protocols, an internal ethics committee, mandatory training, a public-facing policy update. It was not the same as justice, not by any sweep, but it was measurable work. Policy shifted, workshops were scheduled, names on operational manuals changed. Emma left in the quiet way of someone who had packed only what mattered. Daniel helped her carry a small box of office plants and a framed print she'd had on her desk. The team hung a banner that said, "Good luck," in handwriting that looked like it belonged in a school hallway. There was no dramatic last scene, no heroic confrontation. She walked through the lobby with a heavy bag and a lighter ledger. In the new city, the office wasn't as glass slick or lit by the same curated light. The building smelled of rain and municipal coffee rather than lemon cleaner. Her new team was smaller and the culture different. Pragmatic, boots on the ground, people who liked to talk through details over lunch. Daniel visited her on the weekends, offering steady texts and long walks in neighborhoods with bookstores that smelled like old paper and possibility. A different pace allowed her to breathe.
Rebuilding happened slowly. Her first months were patchwork, small wins that were soft but real. The regional campaign she took over found traction with targeted messaging and a series of honest focus groups that Emma insisted on, ones that read like conversations rather than panels. Her work was tactical, the rewards immediate and incremental: a contract extension, a favorable client review, a mention in an internal newsletter as someone who turned a pilot into a stable account. She also began to work with Raphael, a young analyst new to the firm who reminded her of the eagerness she once had when proposals were first novel. He would show up with questions the size of the sky. Under Emma's guidance, he learned to translate data into human insights and to think of campaigns as conversations, not sales. Mentoring him felt like scaffolding for both of them. He learned tools, and she learned the pleasure of building somebody else up. Watching Raphael present his first mini-campaign to the team, nervous, earnest, precise, filled a room with a tangible warmth. Her afternoons found another quiet restoration. She started to paint again, something she had shelved for years as adulthood demanded currency of her time. The canvases were small at first, apartment-scale studies of light and windows, the way city trees rearranged shadows on sidewalks, but they were hers. The act of painting was an uncomplicated ownership. Color, mix, brushstroke. When she sold a painting at a local gallery benefit for a charity that supported vocational programs, the sale felt like a ceremonial reclaiming. She was not merely surviving corporate ripples, she was contributing to a community that made things whole. Months into the transfer, PR cycles began to recede. The company's ethics updates, the compliance workshops, the board reshuffle, these were slow administrative reforms that did not annihilate the past, but attempted to steady the ship so colleagues could work without the same acute exposure to scandal. Alexander took a lower profile role, and then, after a protracted internal review and negotiation, resigned from the executive suite altogether. The headlines noted his step-down and editorialized about the cost of blurred lines. Some readers found satisfaction in the arc, others found it too neat. Emma read the articles in curated fragments and felt an odd blankness where hurt had been. It was not relief, not exactly. It was the feeling of a wound that had ceased to ache and now wanted a new kind of attention. She did not expect a clean sloughing off of consequence. People rarely rewrite the past. She did expect the labor of living forward. That labor was small, cultivating a reputation of competence, setting boundaries that could not be misread, accepting invitations to speak at panels on ethical marketing with a nervousness that softened into purpose. She began to accept that courage was not a single public roar, but the daily act was showing up under new terms.
At a desk one Tuesday, a regional campaign finally launched into a client's platform and hit metrics that exceeded projections. Her team cheered in muted ways, the kind of professional satisfaction that is both modest and viscous. Raphael looked at her with something like pride, and she felt an uncomplicated joy that had nothing to do with headlines. Daniel sent a message that simply said, "You look less tired in the courtyard. That's good." She thought about how resilience had less to do with musical crescendos and more to do with the steady task of walking through a day and choosing again. Sometimes, when the city was quiet and she took the train home, she would think of the gala screen. She would think of the way the clip had made private life public, how quickly perception could fold in on a person, and how offices, however pitched as meritocratic, folded into the public wins. She would think of Alexander and of the board's questions, and of the way institutional systems often prioritized reputation over real repair. She held gratitude for small things, the quiet rigor of her mentor relationships, the way Claire had stood by her professional choices, the steady presence of Daniel. There were nights, too, when the memory of that one night with Alexander felt less like a wound and more like a weathered page, a part of her earliest narrative she had reinterpreted rather than carried. She did not romanticize what had happened. She had learned from it. It had taught her boundaries, given her a cautionary intelligence about power, and carved in her the need for clear lines between personal and professional. A year after the gala, the company threw another charity event. Not a gala exactly, but a community-facing reception in a gallery downtown. The event featured local artists who'd been part of the regional cultural programs. Emma attended as a supporter, a mentor, a representative of the company's new community initiatives. Her painting was on display, modestly framed, and a small plaque beside it noted that proceeds would go to the vocational charity the gallery supported. People she had not expected to see approached to talk about the campaign, about mentorship, about the ethics curriculum the company had adopted. There was a quiet irony in some of the conversation. The world turned, and the machine of work continued its grind. Alexander did not attend. His name appeared in the papers occasionally, tied to a column on corporate culture or a thought piece about leadership missteps. The company, for its part, carried on. Policies remained on the books. The lessons were folded into training modules. The painting sold that night to a local collector who wanted it for the wall of a small nonprofit office. The money went to the charity. The feeling of the sale was a summation and a quiet benediction, that her hands could make something others would value for reasons she did not need to label as redemption or vindication. Months later, when a press cycle about the company's renewed transparency surfaced, it did not read like carved judgment. It read like a long, bureaucratic version of accountability: memos, revised charters, an ethics advisory panel with external members. No one promised that scars would vanish. Everyone promised, in institutional language, to do the ongoing work. It was a form of measured correction, the kind that required slow checks rather than sudden spectacles. Emma's final reconciliation with the chapter did not come as a dramatic confrontation in a meeting room or an epic public address. It came in smaller acts, mentoring Raphael through his first major pitch, watching a senior client call her by her first name with the same casual trust they'd once reserved for the people on the board, taking a train at night and watching the city unfurl lights like a slow applause. She had kept the ledger of her life in hand and become fluent enough in its margins to move forward. On a rainy evening, she sat on a train headed across the river. The carriage smelled of wet wool and coffee, a sound of conversation threaded through with the steady rhythm of tracks. She leaned her head against the glass and watched the city lights smear into long strokes as the train sliced through night. There was an economy to the motion. The past moved behind and the present moved forward. You could be carried by both directions, but you were always making choices about which way to look. She had chosen to transfer, to refuse a buyout, to reclaim her craft rather than let silence define her. She had chosen to mentor, to paint, to find small triumphs in campaigns and in the sale of a canvas that would help others. She had not been promised tidy justice. She had accepted that truth had a cost. But truth had also offered a currency: openness, policy reform, a space for colleagues to work without the same veiled ambiguities. As the train rolled on, Emma let the lights pass. The city pressed its soft, indifferent beauty against the glass. In the reflection, she saw a woman less bent by surprise and more practiced in forward motion. That did not mean she had no scars. It only meant that the scars no longer determined the architecture of her days. If Emma's story has stayed with you so far, follow along. There are more small acts ahead.